Do you want to learn to aim like this? In this video, I interviewed my friend Hollow, who's one of the best aimers in all of Apex Legends. I got him to spill the beans on how he trains his aim, his thoughts on improving recoil control and hitting players at longer distances, the biggest movement techniques that new players should start learning, how to make the best rotations around the map, strategies to win more games in ranked play, and which legends are the best to spend your time learning, and so much more. I'm really excited to share this one with you guys. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first topic I'm actually really excited to talk to you about, because I know we're both fairly avid aim trainers. We met in the Kovacs community through the Voltaic guys. So when I watch your videos, in my opinion, the most impressive aim category that you have is your target switching. Like when I see you flick from one target to another, like with basically pixel perfect accuracy so quickly, it just blows me away. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about like how did you develop your aim? What was your kind of journey from starting off as like a new Apex player? Like what things in the past did you find the most helpful, and what do you think about aim training and developing your own personal aim?
I didn't really expect my target switching to be what ended up setting me apart from other players, but it was, and I think I can attribute a lot of that to my 4,000 some odd hours in Overwatch. Tracer and Genji were probably my biggest, I guess you could say, influences for the kind of playstyle that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Because both Tracer and Genji force you to have to reacquire your target on a 360-degree plane, very, very dynamically, especially with especially Genji. And then in terms of just the active acquisition, like let's say this bot right here and this, I don't know. I think it's really more of just something that I've gone out of my way to practice, because I don't really see a lot of people being proactive in their aim in that respect. I think that there's a lot of people that will just mag dump one guy, reload, and then mag dump the next guy instead of trying to be proactive in the amount of pressure that they're applying. It really was just kind of a willpower thing, but I think that applying equal pressure to different targets on a character like Soldier kind of influenced that, or I guess you could say laid the groundwork for it.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts
Training.
on, did you develop okay, so one thing I noticed a lot of times for myself and for other players when I watch like their perspectives, when it goes to switching, is that it's really common to either underkill or overkill a target, right? Where like you shoot, not enough bullets to kill it and you think that you got the kill, but you didn't. And so you've moved on too early, or you overkill it where you keep shooting more bullets than are required, and so then you could have spent those bullets like switching to your next target that you need to kill. You have any thoughts on that?
I think that just comes from being in tune with what's happening and what's going on. I think that after 4,000 hours of Apex, it's not something that I've really had to think about. What a lot of people try to do is they try to memorize how to move their mouse from one point to another, when on a circle there's an infinite amount of points,
Yeah.
and like there's not really any real way to memorize it. It's just kind of a recognition of what motion needs to be made, and then how early or how late you make that recognition relative to the time that you have to execute the switch is ultimately what is this it's ultimately the deciding variable for a lot of people. Because if I know that someone is, so let's say I'm positioning right here,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna shoot this target, and I know that I'm gonna shoot the target right in front of me, right? And I know that this target is going to stay there the entire time, then I already know what motion I need to make prior, and it's not really something that I stress too much about. With regards to reactive target switches, I think I struggle with that a little bit too, just like instantly like moving my mouse to where someone comes on an unexpected angle.
Mhm.
If there's one thing that I would or one tip that I would give to people trying to learn their target switching in any game, is to not prioritize being pixel perfect the first time, because whenever that's the goal, a lot of people tend to get lost whenever they don't execute that and they don't know how to recover from it. People should instead look to make the initial motion of acquisition as fast as possible and get it as close to the target as possible, and then to make a minor correction for whatever space there is that's left.
I love that you said that. That's something that I've been working on too, because I've been doing a lot of Kovacs like small dot training lately, and that's one of the concepts I've talked about with some of our mutual friends about how basically like there's this sort of unknown thing that everyone thinks that like high level players just like perfectly flick their mouse from one target to the next in one single motion, and when you actually like break it down and look very in slow motion, a lot of top players, although it looks like it's one motion because it's so fast, it's actually two motions where their first motion is to flick very close to the target, and then their second motion is actually to do like a micro correction onto the target, whether they underflicked or overflicked or whatever it happens to be. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, my philosophy when training this skill set in Kovacs and in game and just reviewing my VODs from a mechanical perspective and thinking about it is that on the way up to where I'm at now, it's better for you to hit your shots very slowly than it is for you to miss them very fast.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense. That's probably a really helpful way to think about it. What do you think about just aim training and Kovacs in general? Like, do you, especially for target switching, do you find that those types of drills are helpful? I know we've talked a little bit about like the new, like Kovacs has like a new Apex trainings built in or whatever now, and you kind of mentioned that you thought some of those were okay, but not really like the ideal thing for people to be practicing. You have any thoughts on like how people should spend their time if they do want to spend time specifically aim training like outside of Apex?
I think that a lot of people need to have a healthy realization of what aim trainers are and what their role is in the whole journey of their improvement. I use this phrase all the time, and I kind of coined it per se, but um, Kovacs or just aim trainers in general increase the concentration of the exposure that you have to environments that require the usage and development of your mechanical skill. But this is obviously done at the expense of practicing that mechanical skill in a game specific way. So um, it's obviously good to balance Kovacs out with your desired game, because uh, learning how to click static dots is not going to help you learn how to click heads in Valorant necessarily. There's a lot of game sense and
Mm-hmm.
movement and positioning aspects to it as well that you don't really learn. I think that Kovacs is excellent for the acquisition and the speed aspect of target switching, but as for the application, I think that Kovacs is actually a lot more, I wouldn't say useless, but not as effective as people think that it is. Because knowing when, I've gotten to a point where I can switch off of a target as soon as I know that the last bullet that will hit them has left my gun. Just because I'm in tune with the speed of the projectiles and I'm in tune with how my gun shoots and I'm confident in my ability to hit that last shot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas, that's not something that you can learn in Kovacs, or learning how where people are moving. Kind of going back to the whole Genji aspect of things. Whenever you dash up into the air with your sword in or your dragon blade in Overwatch, you have to, in order to get the most amount of value, you have to take a mental note of where all 6 players are on that team, what cooldowns they have, and where they'll be moving. So there's, I think that basically what I'm trying to say is there's a lot more of a game sense aspect to target switching than there is a mechanical aspect, since it's not tracking where you have to react to the target's change of direction in a very precise way, or learn how to read their movement in a very I guess you could say like a micro way as opposed to a macro way. Being in tune with what they're doing just as much as you are with what you're doing is a lot more important than just the motion. I think that a lot of people would benefit from that by not looking at target switching from a strictly mechanical perspective.
Okay.
But aim training can definitely help with the mechanical aspect of things, but it's not going to help anywhere near as much as studying the craft, if you will.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good way to approach it. So specifically in Apex, one of the things that I've noticed, because I come from mostly playing like Destiny 2 as my main game, which is hit scan, and I don't have to worry about projectiles for the most part. And something that's kind of given me personally some trouble in Apex is adjusting to the like projectile nature of the weapons, or like trying to lead your target a little bit. Especially it seems like in this game it's like pretty slow projectiles compared to like a lot of other projectile games that I have played. And I'm just curious, like, especially when it comes to like combining that with like recoil control and also like shooting targets who are at further range. Like I watch a lot of top players like beam someone with like a R301 or something from very far, and it seems like they don't miss a bullet. Do you have any tips for newer players on how to approach like recoil control, combining that with projectile, like get leading a target, stuff like that?
If I have to lead my shots, then they're not close enough. So I'm gonna move into their forehead to where I don't have to worry about it. Factoring in the way that recoil works in Apex and in conjunction with projectiles can seem like a pretty daunting and a pretty difficult thing to get used to. But at the end of the day, it doesn't even really come down to something like visualizing where your target will be versus where the projectiles are. There's obviously ways to go about isolating the skill set and practicing it, but I would honestly think that or honestly I'm of the opinion that not overcomplicating it and making it to where you don't go out of your way to make it a problem is going to be infinitely more beneficial than actively focusing on it. When it comes to something like horizontal recoil, I honestly just shake my mouse from left to right a little bit
Gotcha.
across the target. When it comes to recoil on an R301, I do my best to just kind of mitigate for it or mitigate it reactively as opposed to proactively, where instead of just like going out of my way to memorize the pattern and try to incorporate it in my gameplay, I kind of just pull down and from side to side just intuitively. I don't really that my playstyle doesn't really revolve around long range or long distance recoil control and beaming people from across the galaxy.
Right,
It's more
you're
of
kind of
just
more
like an
close.
in your face kind of a playstyle.
Yeah, that
And I
makes
think that
sense.
has to do with the difficulty that I did have with it. I think that if I were to give one tip to anybody struggling with recoil by itself, it would be to AD strafe. It can help really mitigate a lot of horizontal recoil, especially if you can kind of get a rhythm
So you're saying
relative
like
to
strafing side to side while you're shooting?
yeah,
For people who might not know that term.
just because there's different weapons in this game slow you at different rates. So with an R301, which is an assault rifle, you're gonna get a 50% decrease in strafe speed, and strafing left to right almost like perfectly matches the way in which the recoil moves. So that's honestly one of the things that I leverage to my advantage. But as for bullet lead, unless you're in a ranked environment at a high level, if you have to lead your shots to hit someone, they're not close enough, and you need to get closer.
Yeah,
Because you're gonna have to loot them at the end of the day anyway.
Right,
So
right.
why waste your time, in my opinion?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting hearing you say that because I one of the other games I grew up playing quite a bit was Counter-Strike, and in that game like everyone like praises like learning recoil patterns perfectly so you can like exactly hit like a single spot with your AK-47. So it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about doing it more reactively as opposed to like premeditated like pattern learning.
I would prefer to have a premeditated approach to recoil, but I've spent so much time and energy working on other skill sets that it's not something that I really bother with. Some of the best players in the game, like Senox especially, Senox is probably one of the most underrated players mechanically. He plays for Sentinels currently. He shakes his mouse from left to right on the target in the most controlled way possible to mitigate for recoil, and he hits beams that are absurdly high, like with an R9, for example, especially with the crazy horizontal recoil at the end. So, I mean, as much as I hate to say it, my biggest recoil tip is to spam AD and shake mouse.
Good enough. Works for me. Speaking of using a mouse, like I don't want to go too deep into this, but do you have any particular thoughts on like, mouse and keyboard of like, particular ones that you think that makes a big difference in a player's ability, or it's like kind of overhyped with like needing the best gaming mouse, etc.? Any like quick thoughts on that?
I view peripherals as the platform from which the skill sets of mechanics are executed, and I think that some platforms are going to be better than others for people. But for the most part, a lot of people overcomplicate what mousepad, monitor, keyboard they use. At the end of the day, on paper, you should be working hard enough to be able to do anything that anybody else can, but on your given setup. I think it's important to have a healthy realization of how those things affect you and what you might want to change, but I really don't think about it too much.
So one more thing I want to cover on like the aiming skill set. Any tips for hitting like really small, fast moving targets? Like for example, you have wraiths who are kind of especially at the beginning of Apex, were very difficult to hit.
So contrary to a lot of popular belief, every character in Apex has the same base movement speed, the same base strafe speed, and I mean the same everything, unless it's being directly manipulated by a movement ability like Octane Stim.
Hmm.
Uh, every character moves at the exact same speed. It's just that characters like Wraith might appear to move faster because they're smaller, and because their strafes don't encompass as much space as someone like a Gibraltar. Personally, I never let the size of a hitbox get in the way of the way that I aim. I personally approached that from the perspective of I'm just going to learn how to hit the smallest character so that way I can learn how to hit the biggest character.
Hmm.
But one thing that I can definitely put myself in a new player's shoes and I can kind of feel for them. My biggest piece of advice would be to tighten things up a little bit. With characters like Gibraltar, whenever you react to a Gibraltar's change of direction in the way that they might strafe, it's a lot easier to correct because there's so much more margin for error. So just with smaller characters like Wraith, focus on tightening up those kinds of motions and making them smaller, since they're not taking up as much space on your screen.
Let's move on to more like movement topics and like kind of how to move well around the game with different mechanics. So, first question I had on this was basically about how do you use the terrain and the environment to interact with it to move faster, whether that's like, doing different slide jumps or like jumping off walls, stuff like that. What do you think like the most useful tips are for, especially for newer players who maybe don't have their movement dialed in yet?
There isn't one particular piece of terrain for a new player that I would recommend that they try to master. I think movement is pretty overhyped in a macro sense. The execution of a lot of these different crazy looking techniques, like on this wall, for example, me bouncing onto the side into a tap strafe to climb on top of it. Like that's pretty advanced tech, and it's only really useful in so many different situations.
Hmm.
I would actually suggest that players focus on slide jumping once every 3 seconds and making sure that they count that out loud until it happens. So, like, if you're not slide jumping once every 3 seconds, don't focus on anything else. I also recommend that you pull your fists out. This is, I mean, it's gonna make you want an heirloom even more, but it's worth it because you get like I think it's a 13% increase in movement speed. I don't know the exact number, but I do know just in source velocity numbers, running with my weapons holstered and with my wraith knife out is 299. Whereas if I were to put my wingman out, it's
Hmm.
260. So just taking that little bit of an extra advantage. But slide jump every 3 seconds. If I had to give an answer to that in a more direct way or in a way that more that fit the question a bit more, I would say leverage balloons to your advantage to move around the map faster in a sort of macro sense. They're exceptionally broken. All you have to do is just go to the very top of the balloon, hold right click to free look, and then dive down to 133 and then pull up to 143 while making sure that you're staying a reasonable distance above the ground, and you should be good.
I'd actually know that about. I like back in the day, I used to use the free look thing where you like look up at the sky, to like float around endlessly before they patched
Right.
that. Like I took a long break in between playing Apex from when it first came out.
You know, wall jumping and tap strafing and all of that stuff is there. That you really need to focus more on establishing a good base platform from which to execute those techniques as opposed to just skipping them right away.
Yeah, that makes sense. On the slightly more advanced stuff, what about things like bunny hopping, like jumping and like slide strafing while you're like in a duel, stuff like that? What are your thoughts on the more advanced tactics? Anything that you think people should try to start focusing on, or do you think it's useful?
There's a lot of top content creators in this game that can long strafe for an entire fight and win. I'm not gonna name any names, but movement is definitely something that is not necessarily overhyped, but something that a lot of people view to be unnecessary. Because in order to in order to proactively integrate movement into your playstyle, you really do have to go out of your way. And in a lot of instances, there are people that are of the opinion that you can win a fight without all of that extra flashy stuff. But I would say that one of the most beneficial movement techniques is going to be the tap strafe. So if you're looking at me, if I'm moving this way, you can kind of see how fast I can change direction
Hmm.
with a tap strafe. My velocity shoots up pretty high if I execute it correctly, especially in a 180-degree sense. I can also strafe 90 degrees pretty well, even on a dead slide right there. Um,
Can you talk
it
people through that technique? Like what are you actually doing when you say tap strafe?
Um, so what I'm doing is I am slide jumping first, and then I am using an air strafe. So an air strafe is just whenever you let go of W and you press either your A or D keys while moving your mouse in a corresponding way. Very similar to, it's actually the exact same motion as surfing in Counter-Strike. But then I have my mouse wheel down, bound to my W key as a forward input, and so in order to perform those tap strafes, I simply just accentuate the air strafe with a lot of scroll down inputs, which are, technically W inputs. And that
Interesting.
allows me to have that crazy sort of directional control. It's a Titanfall 2 speedrunning technique that made its way into Apex. Moki Sniper popularized and has a lot of great resources on the topic.
All right. So I think the next big category we should start talking about is more things around game sense and like how do you actually approach the game when it comes to strategy, rotation, stuff like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is a lot of other games that people are familiar with have a radar that tells you where people are and otherwise have like really good sound. But how do you like navigate that, like kind of having a good idea of like when people are starting to approach you or like when you're about to go clear an area, like how do you know if someone's there if you can't actually like necessarily see them like easily?
I think that a lot of that comes from being in tune with the map, and just kind of playing the game out and coming to an intuitive realization and understanding of what POIs or points of interest are going to be clogged or going to have people by default versus places that aren't. I also think that a lot of people actually rely too much on the radar systems that they have in their given games to know where the exact location of a player is or the general location of a player is, as opposed to just simply anticipating it and then reacting to it. Apex is a game where if there's someone that wants to shoot at you, you'll probably know.
Yeah.
Because it's not like there's crazy like forts or small head glitches for people to peek from. The game is actually very dynamic and people have to move around in a given spot quite a bit. I think that from a from like a game sense perspective, just like knowing where people are really just kind of comes from, I guess you could say, a lot of visual information, because you can rely on audio but only so much. Anybody who says Apex has good audio has not played enough Apex at all. um but yeah, I think that like understanding what like becoming in tune with the map and then being able to distinguish movement against it, is, at varying ranges, is going to be your best friend. And just making sure that you're proactively panning your camera around, looking at a 180-degree radius, not just tunnel visioning on one spot, and playing on 110 FOV as well. You need them as much visual information as you can get. It's not like playing on something like 90, for example, is going to give you too much of a disadvantage, but I'll take every crumb I can get in
Yeah,
this game.
absolutely. I think that's a very smart mindset. How do you go about approaching like if you're coaching a new player who's trying to kind of get their grips with the game and maybe like climb a little bit in ranked and whatnot, how do you start approaching like, you know, do you try to learn what every single character does, or like how do you invest your time into like the best usage of each ability? You have any thoughts on like how to start, because it's a little bit overwhelming, especially like me coming back to the game. Like there's a few characters I still really don't understand their kits, and it's like I don't know if it's like even worth it to, it's like you don't come across some of them all that often. So any thoughts on that?
I think that people severely overestimate just how deep of a game Apex actually is. Each character has one tactical, one ultimate, and one passive. Going into the firing range and just going into you can press your map key to select different characters while you're in the range, and then just kind of hovering over the character to see what their abilities are, and even picking them and playing around with them and seeing how they interact with things, or just playing the different legends. That definitely can help. Obviously, if you're a newer player and you don't have all of the legends unlocked yet, then that can be a little difficult. But for the most part, it's not like there's going to be some crazy ability that's going to like completely blind you or rob you of your line of sight, like in Valorant.
Yeah.
Or there's not going to be some crazy wombo combo World of Warcraft type abilities where you have to memorize like a whole like resource management system or whatever. Every character is pretty straightforward and easy to understand and learn. I don't think that people should view it to be as much of a threat as they make it out to be. The game is pretty straightforward in that respect. One thing that I would stay away from though is classifying the characters based on what class they have in the menu.
Oh, okay.
So Bloodhound, for example, is classified as a recon character. You can kind of see that by their icons. Don't classify the characters according to that. It's a very scuffed system and is not going to give you a very good understanding of the game. Just knowing what the characters are and what they do at a very base level is going to benefit you a lot more than overcomplicating it.
Gotcha. Okay, I think that's pretty smart. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is basically how do you approach the map, like when you first land, and then like when you start to go for like rotating around to find other teams to fight, and like what are your kind of like how do you approach that in a meta sense?
It's not really about identifying on a map like King's King. It's not really about identifying things like where the major points of interest are, although that is helpful. It really just comes down to rotating around the map in a way that's going to give you the most amount of audio, like gunshots for third parties or playing for things like really long lines of sight. I think that that is going to be in the best interest of someone trying to learn the map. Rotate around the map, find the fastest routes between as many different general areas as possible. Again, leverage those balloons to your advantage. Find out which balloons are closest to each other and chain those together. Like you can stretch from the artillery balloon, the one that's right outside of artillery, all the way down to the bunker balloon, believe it or not, if you stretch it right. So again, I think that's obviously like this is going to be my answer to a lot of different things, but overcomplicating it is definitely not the play. Just kind of learning how to like move around the map as fast as you can is going to benefit you more than like having a set planned out rotation. I never rotate the same way twice unless I'm dropping in the exact same spot and like, oh, I want to try this. Like I just walk around the map and things just happen.
Related to that is when you do start to come across enemies and maybe you see an opportunity to like become the third party in a fight, which seems to be what everyone tries to do, is always be the third party. Like how do you have any tips on like approaching that wisely where you are like the third party and you're not like accidentally putting yourself in a situation where you have two teams fighting you all of a sudden? Anyways, like advice on approaching that in a smart way.
Learning how to distinguish when a fight is being committed on versus when a fight is not being committed on is really important. I think that people severely underestimate just how quickly two different teams will disengage whenever they have the opportunity, whenever they have the chance to then posture themselves against you. Because it's not like they're teaming against you, but it's that in both of their minds, you are the more immediate threat. You have spent absolutely no resources in the fight. You have taken no damage, expended no grenades or ammo. So you are going to be priority number one. Coming at third-party situations in a way that kind of allows you to not be directly seen is really, really important. Sorry, my nose is really stopped up.
It's all good.
Doing it in a way where, instead of walking in when they both have the opportunity to see and react to where you are, instead just coming at it from the perspective of like, are these people like, who are these people going to be more focused on, me or them? Like if they're both in opposing buildings and shooting each other through windows and just kind of waving at each other like they're neighbors, that's probably not the best opportunity to third party, because I call those poke fights.
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever a team is in the same building as each other, they don't have any opportunity to get any more information. They don't even have the opportunity to decommit from the fight that they're in. That's a really good time to kind of swoop in and make sure that you can kind of clean up all of those kills. But just kind of playing in a way that prevents you from being the center of attention is really important.
Okay.
You never want to be the full focus of anybody's gaze, for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Any just general meta strategies that you would give to, especially like thinking of players who are maybe like in the bottom half of the ranked ladder, like trying to maybe climb up through silver, gold, plat, diamond? What types of things would you tell players in that situation to focus on for trying to get wins and like last later in the game, other than I guess just hiding? I don't know.
I think that when it comes to third partying, finishing the fight as quickly as you can is very important because what you're doing in taking part in and prolonging that fight is you are giving other teams around you audio-visual information that allows them to take the same position that you might have just a couple of seconds ago, to be able to then third party themselves. So I would say, believe it or not, grenades are like gonna be the best way to finish fights quickly. If I were to just do this real quick, you will not die. But if I were to throw, actually you will die, but I can res you. That's like an instant free kill if you stick someone with an arc star. Frag grenades are really, really, free 100 damage.
What's your tier list for grenades, real quick? By the way, speaking of that, like, what if you have an option between the 3 different types? So what are you going for?
Arc stars all the way.
Arc stars, yeah.
Sticking someone with an arc star, I think it halves their sensitivity, which is a stupid mechanic, by the way.
Oh my god,
but
so
I think
annoying.
it halves their sensitivity. That's why you want a DPI switch. I've done that before and it's worked out pretty well. Then you have the movement speed decrease, I think, by quite a lot. Actually, let me test that out real quick while I'm talking. Go ahead and
sure.
grab an arc star and stick me with it, and I'll test it out. Yeah, but like just the like my velocity just dropped down to something
Very
comparable to me aiming down sights and strafing with a sniper rifle, which is crazy decrease. But yeah, my sensitivity gets screwed over, my movement speed gets screwed over, my visual information, my audio, everything. It's just a free, like, if you stick someone and lose the fight, you need to seriously rethink like how you played that fight, because that's literally a free win. Pro players will commit more onto someone who's been stuck than or onto a team who has a member that's been stuck, as opposed to someone who's been downed. That's how powerful they are. So yeah. But finishing fights quickly with grenades is really important. Obviously, even though arc stars are like the best in my opinion, other nades are obviously useful. Thermites for long-term pressure on a given point, or frag nades just for instantaneous burst damage.
Do you have a preference of the two? Like, if you had, okay, so like, let's say there's no arc stars around, like, and you need to pick up like one of the other two, which ones are you typically go for? Or is it more situational?
I'm probably gonna pick up frag nades because I can throw them directly up in the air and then they can explode and on their forehead and make for a really cool clip. Or I could throw them like right above my head in a fight and then just go into my wraith phase and then watch them explode in front of me. But in all seriousness, like, frag nades are probably going to have a lot more. They're harder to execute, so it's like higher risk, but especially when you're using them more defensively, because they don't zone off an area for as long. But if someone gets caught in a frag nade, like, it's the damage is just crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But thermites are obviously very useful, but I personally prefer frags.
Okay. Cool. If someone on your team gets downed and then you have like a 2v3 or something, do you have any like meta tips on like how to approach that when like a member of your team is either downed or like needs to like chill for a second and heal, or like any thoughts on like how to approach that, especially for players who are maybe like, not brand new but newer to the game, they're not pro level?
The more competitive the environment is that you're in, the more that you're going to want to prioritize keeping as many people up on your team as you can, because even if someone is alive with 1 HP, they can still produce a lot of value in the fight. For people starting out, it's okay to go and commit onto the fight. It just depends on how competent you are at the end of the day. If you have 2 teammates down, but you've got a bunch of cracks and they're 1, you can go and push that and finish it and then come back and res. It's situational, like how low are they versus how low are we? What position are we in? Can I res? Or do I need to like commit? If we're in the open, then you probably want to commit. You probably want to just like hope that your teammate can get out alive with a knockdown shield. But
yeah,
in kind of a situation like where you have like multiple teams, like letting your teammate get thirsted and then like just getting their card and getting out as a character that might have more mobility is probably a better idea than going out of your way to try to res them over and over again when they're just gonna get lasered because they know that you've committed on that. Like sometimes obviously playing your life as much as you can is important, and you don't want to just let down your knockdown shit a lot of the time. But it really is like a situation by situation thing. There is no one formula or one way to kind of approach it. You know, you could try to classify different situations into different archetypes, but kind of learning as you go and like just being proactive in the way that you play the game in that respect is going to go a lot longer of a way than trying to like, you know, have a premeditated solution for everything.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I view improvement in gaming as you know, like I view a lot of simple concepts, like really with regards to anything, I view a lot of simple concepts as something that you could say is the equivalent to like arithmetic, you know, basic math in school, right? Where, you know, you can memorize your times tables up to 12 or 15, and you can like memorize like division problems, but as the problems get more complex, it comes from an understanding of, you know, it comes from being in tune with the smaller memorizable components and how they interact with each other, and then, you know, becoming in tune with like certain formulas, right? As opposed to just memorizing the answer to everything. And I view like, you know, improvement with regards to aiming, game sense, positioning, whatever, in any respect in that same way, right? Just memorize what you can, become in tune with the core aspects of the game, and then kind of piece it together as you go. You know, being creative is fun and really rewarding.
So let's move on to talking about like loadouts and weapon choices. So like, how do you make decisions on like, you know, getting the first weapons and just fighting right away versus like, you know, trying to like hold off a little bit and loot a little bit more before going into a fight? And then how do you progress like your loadout as you're going more into end game situations? Like, are there combos that you tend to prefer? You'd rather switch certain things out? What are your thoughts on that?
If I have a Mozambique P2020 charge rifle or even something like a scout, then I'll probably hold off. But every other weapon is pretty viable, and I can, you know, there's something that I can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, if I am not hitting 100% of my headshots, then I have no right to blame what weapon I have. You know, at the end of the day, like there are certain weapons that are better than others, but like the mentality that I have is if I don't hit 100% of my headshots or 100% of my shots even, then I shouldn't be complaining about what weapon I had. Stay away from P20s and Mozambiques unless they have hammer points. Charge rifle is really hard to get value out of. So is the Sentinel. So is the longbow. But everything else is a pretty solid pick. Like the weapon balance right now is crazy good relative to each other. Zone specific loadouts, in my opinion, are only viable in competitive environments where you're going to be forced or restricted to play on a specific type of terrain because you know where, you know, the zone is going to pull, you know, where the zone is going to be roughly. So, you know, looking at like a zone on like World's Edge that's going to encompass something like Refinery, you're probably going to want, you know, long range picks that have the ability to do lots of damage on very, very long sight lines. You can really do anything with any weapon within reason. Outside of a competitive environment, I don't really think that people should try to adhere to a certain meta. I personally love using the wingman. I love, you know, it's a really difficult weapon to use, but it's fun. It does large amounts of damage in single instances, and it's rewarding. I like using a Volt. I like using R9. I like using an R301. I like using Flatline. It's dependent on what you like to use. You know, just don't pick snipers in camp, please, or I will finish you until you decide to uninstall the game.
Yeah.
I really just like wingman, shotgun, SMG, and I'm good.
Yeah, that's interesting. What about do snipers fit into your playstyle? I know you like the Kraber for clips sometimes, but for like just general like snipers, do you pick them up, or is it just sort of something you leave on the ground?
I'll use the triple take as a shotgun. That's about it.
Okay.
Because the triple take is like the best shotgun in the game. It's like a shotgun that actually rewards accuracy.
Yeah.
With range as well, it's probably one of the most unbalanced weapons in my opinion.
Interesting.
If I have a challenge, I might pick up a Sentinel, but you know, I'm at that point, I'm just making the game harder for me. You know, and I'm not gonna really do that if I'm sick like I am right now, or like you know, I'm tired or whatever. In competitive, always run a shotgun. If you don't have a shotgun, you're throwing. Shotguns are so unbalanced.
Yeah, that's funny.
It doesn't matter how good your tracking is. Like someone can just two pump you with a Mastiff. Like,
do you prefer Mastiff over Eva right now? What's your thoughts on in the current sandbox?
The Eva and the Mastiff in terms of viability are pretty much the same. Eva functionally does better on more open ground peaks because it's automatic and it's more focused on like tracking, especially because it doesn't have like, if I were to like aim down sights, you know, with the iron sights, there's not very much visual recoil whatsoever. Whereas with the Mastiff, this is a more peak oriented weapon, you know, kind of crouching or like jumping and like, you know.
Right, very bursty damage as opposed to more sustained damage. So first of all, like as far as character balance, like I know there's obviously some like sort of a tier list that happens where with any of these types of games where there's some that are better than others, but how do you feel about the overall balance? And are there particular characters you think are either too strong or too weak that you'd like to see adjusted?
Loba is too weak. Or if I were to pick like the worst characters, it would be Loba, Watson, Mirage, and Rampart.
Hmm.
Revenant's strong, but I think that I think that like the most individually strong legends right now are like Wraith, Horizon, and Gibraltar. But Gibraltar recently got a big nerf with the bleed through damage to his gun shield, so
Yeah,
he's
that's
not as
huge.
good of a character as he used to be. Um, but I think that like Wraith and Horizon really kind of take the cake for like the best the best characters right now individually. But I think that in terms of like the overall balance philosophy that Apex has had, I actually don't really agree with a lot of it. I still think that they're doing a great job, and I understand why they do a lot of what they do. But characters have been very, very, I guess you could say, severely recontextualized into being very strong picks in team contexts, as opposed to being strong in individual contexts. Lifeline is an example of like a really proactive support character that that allowed you to minimize your downtime with healing because you could heal 25% faster plus her drone, which means that you could use small heals and conserve your larger resources for your teammates. Her res where she had like the shield, you could like position your shield wherever you want and have some really cool outplays. I used to do that all the time in ranked.
Hmm.
um but then they reworked her and recontextualized her into a res bot, where now the most powerful asset and the most powerful part of her kit is now only usable and is entirely contingent upon her teammates making the most crucial mistake in the game, which is going down, where it's
Yeah.
just like an auto no brain res. And she can do it over and over and over with no cooldown. So, and then you look at Wraith, where people used to be able to more proactively rotate around the map with Portal, and then they nerfed the Portal distance by 25 meters, and rotations became harder. So at the end of the day, I think that if you're like looking for a legend to play as like a strong, like solo, individually self-sufficient player, Horizon is going to be your S tier pick, and then Wraith. Octane's really good just because he goes fast, but other than that, he's not really.
Yeah.
Nothing really stands out other than just Nyum. As for characters that are really strong, or that like I guess you could say exponentially increase in value, whenever you put them on a team of players that are actively working to use their kit to their advantage, I would say characters like Revenant, uh, Gibraltar, Bloodhound, especially. All of them. Bloodhound and giving free information, Gibraltar with the bubble that allows you to fight teams and like places that you wouldn't have been able to fight them previously.
Hmm.
Um, and then of course, Revenant, where you can just all three completely decommit from the idea of dying and then push the team for free.
Yeah. Oh man. What about as far as like the how the ranking system works? Do you think that it's like a good system right now? Do you think it needs changes? Any thoughts on like that part of the game?
It's a battle royale. I don't think that the rank system will ever be or ever live up to what I expect it to be. You can die off drop 3 games in a row and then gain all of those points back in Predator, by the way,
Yeah.
with 1 win. The like a Bloodhound that scans targets. Actually, don't remember. I don't know if this is a thing anymore. I haven't played ranked in so long. I forgot what they patched and what they didn't patch. But like a Bloodhound could literally deal 0 damage to anybody for an entire game as long as they scan targets within a certain amount of time of them dying, and then they would get the assist for it. And then
Oh,
you would get the same amount of points as someone who had dropped 20 kills and 4,000 damage in a ranked lobby.
right.
Um, I think that the kill cap needs to be removed, and I think that it would be more reflective of like instead of like it being a grind fest, it actually comes down to like who's doing more per game. I would rather see. I would like the punishments for losing or going negative to be a lot more harsh, especially at like higher ranks than it is now. But at the end of the day, battle royales are not inherently competitive games. There's so much randomness.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
made competitive by the drive and initiative of their player base, but they're not competitive
Right, it's
games
not
for
like
sure.
CS or Valorant or something that's like designed from the ground up to be like a
Yeah.
competitive type experience.
I don't really think that there's a way to integrate like an elo based system into a game mode that is not only random but also has like, you know, 60 players that, you know, it's just hard. They're
Yeah.
doing the best they can, and I appreciate the effort, but I just don't think that it would ever really live up to my expectations as a spoiled Overwatch veteran.
Totally. So this is actually, that's a really good transition to the final question I have for you, which is basically just what do you think that Apex's like strengths and weaknesses are, and how do you think that it compares to like other BR games, and then also just like other non-BR games, like in terms of, you know, things like arena shooters or like round-based tactical stuff. Like, what do you think its best things going for it are?
I think that Apex has a lot of nuance and complexity to its gunplay, its movement, and its characters, but it's not so complicated to where people feel like they're playing a first-person MOBA, like something like Siege or Valorant, where, you know, you have to really become in tune with all of the players' abilities. Like, you can, you know, you don't have to know what everybody does as long as you just shoot them, right?
Yeah.
I think that, you know, it also gives the illusion of impact to a lot of worse players by being random. You know, you can win games without doing too much. The game can kind of play itself out for you, or you can take ownership and control over the situation and be an aggressive player. I think that it can definitely, you know, it definitely caters to a wide variety or a very, very wide audience. Battle royales are the future of gaming. They're not going away anytime soon.
Yeah,
And
for
so I
sure.
think that, you know, Apex exemplifies what a battle royale should be like.
Hmm. It just does so many like really interesting things with the different characters, and the weapons feel so good to use, and the movement's really interesting, and I feel like it's very like it's a super unique offering in the, you know, the scene of all these different BR choices.
Right.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming to talk with me. It's really cool, and I think people are going to enjoy this a lot. I definitely learned a lot from what you shared. Where can people find you online? What's the best place to come, like, watch your content and hang out with you?
That'd probably be my Twitch. I am a lot more proactive on there. Am on any other platform right now. I like being interactive. I like going out of my way to answer questions and make sure that I give people a little bit more of a personalized experience. I am going to be centralizing a lot of my educational content on my YouTube, though,
Hmm.
in the form of really easy to process, sort of small guides that will add up into really nice, comprehensive playlists for sure.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. That's sweet. I'm excited.
I appreciate you having me. Sorry for the runny nose
That's
and
all
being
good.
sick.
Got
Is
those
what it is,
the
but
Midwest
yeah.
allergies. I'm with you on that, so no worries, man. Cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.